What would you do if you discovered your skin could be woven into the most beautiful clothes ever seen? That every thread peeled from your body created patterns more mesmerizing than any ordinary fabric? And what if you realized you couldn't stop tearing at your own skin, even when only raw flesh and throbbing nerves remained? In Berlin, there's a legend about a woman who uncovered this terrible gift. That winter in Berlin was especially brutal. In the narrow streets of Kreuzberg, where old brick buildings seemed to sag under the weight of the snow, lived Elise Schneider, a seamstress with extraordinary talent but no recognition. At 37, Elise was known only to the locals, who brought their clothes to her cramped ground floor shop in a dilapidated building for minor repairs. Her studio was a maze of fabrics stacked on shelves that reached the ceiling, half-dressed mannequins, and ancient sewing machines. The place smelled of dust and loneliness. Elise lived alone in the apartment above the shop ever since her mother, also a seamstress, had passed away 5 years earlier. The war had left visible scars on the city, but Elise's scars were different. Since she was young, she'd suffered from a strange condition. Her skin was hypersensitive, and in moments of stress it would peel off in long strips, like ribbons of fabric. Just severe dermatitis, the doctors would say, prescribing creams that never worked. But Elise knew it was something more. When financial troubles worsened and clients started flocking to big department stores, her condition took a drastic turn for the worse. One January night, after the last customer left without paying for a winter coat repair, Elise felt the familiar itch on her forearm. Absently, she scratched at the reddened skin, and a long, thin strip came loose. Unlike her usual flakes, this one had a strange texture, flexible, durable, almost like silk. On impulse, Elise grabbed a needle. "This is insane," she thought, as she threaded it. To her shock, the needle pierced the strip of skin effortlessly, and she managed to sew a few experimental stitches. The result stunned her. The small piece of handiwork she'd crafted from her own skin had a pearlescent sheen and an impossible texture. Under the dim light of her studio's lamp, the stitches seemed to pulse with a life of their own. "This is madness," she whispered to herself, but her fingers were already itching to peel off another strip, and another, and another. By dawn, Elise stared, both enraptured and horrified, at a small square of fabric made entirely from her own skin. The pain from the wounds on her arm was intense, but something stronger kept her from caring. A heady sense of creation, unlike anything she'd ever felt. Carefully, she bandaged her wounds and went to the mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes bloodshot from exhaustion. But there was something different in them, a spark of discovery, of purpose, and something darker, deeper, something she didn't yet recognize as obsession. In the weeks that followed, Elise began incorporating small pieces of her skin into her work. A detail here, an embroidered accent there. Her clients noticed the difference immediately. "What is this extraordinary fabric?" asked a high society Berliner, running her fingers over a dress with delicate detailing on the collar. "It's a secret family technique," Elise replied, nervously tugging her sleeve to hide the growing number of bandages. At night, alone in her studio, she continued her gruesome work. With a sharp blade, she sliced off increasingly larger strips of her skin. The pain no longer mattered. The blood staining the floor was just a minor inconvenience. What mattered was the feeling of watching her creation take shape. A dress unlike any ever made, woven from the essence of her very being. But there was a problem. Her skin didn't regenerate fast enough to keep up with her growing ambition, and the dress she was creating, her masterpiece, had to be finished. Berlin Fashion Week was approaching, and for the first time, Elise had secured a spot to showcase her work. That's when she started looking at others differently. not as people, but as raw material, as the surface layers of her thighs and arms were transformed into fabric. Elise began to feel a change. Each time she removed a piece of herself, something else seemed to slip away. Not just skin, but fragments of her humanity. The first person to disappear was a homeless man who used to sleep near Elise's studio. No one noticed he was gone, except for a scrawny cat that kept meowing at the back door of the shop, searching for the scraps the man used to share. The second was a young, disoriented tourist who asked for directions late one night. Elise invited him in, offered him tea. He never left. In the basement of her studio, lit only by candles, Elise honed her craft. She discovered that different parts of the human body produced distinct textures. The skin from the back was tougher, perfect for the dress's structure. The skin from the stomach was more pliable, folding into delicate pleats, and the skin from the face. Oh, the face's skin created patterns of transcendent beauty. The dress was nearly complete, a gruesome work of art, a mosaic of human skin, stitched together with threads made from tendons and hair. When Elise wore it for the first time, she felt a primal connection to every patch, as if they were still alive, pulsing against her own body. The mirror revealed something that no longer looked human. Prolonged exposure to the deeper layers of her own skin had transformed Elise. Her muscles were visible in several places, twitching in the open air. Coated in a thin layer of crystalline fluid, her body had begun to secrete. Her eyes, lidless, couldn't close. Her mouth, partially lipless, exposed her teeth in a permanent, grotesque smile. But she was beautiful. The dress complemented her transformed body, as if they were one organism. Spiraling patterns ran across the garment from the hem to the neckline, where tiny, meticulously stitched patches formed miniature faces, faces that seemed to whisper when no one was looking. Fashion Week was approaching, and Elise could barely contain her excitement. Her creation would be unveiled to the world, and everyone would understand her genius. Her art transcended mere aesthetics. It was a living manifesto about pain, transformation, and true beauty. The night before the big event, something strange started happening. First, Elise felt an itch where the dress touched her exposed flesh. Then she noticed tiny filaments connecting the fabric to her skin. She tried to pull them off, but they were surprisingly strong. By dawn, the horrific truth became clear. The dress was fusing with her. Or maybe she was fusing with the dress. The seams separating the patches of skin began to pulse like veins. The fabric shifted subtly, as if it were breathing. Horrified, Elise tried to tear it off, but every tug brought excruciating pain. The filaments had burrowed deep, linking to her muscles, nerves, and blood vessels. In the mirror, she saw her transformed reflection. She was no longer Elise, nor was she the dress. She was something in between. A chimera of fabric and flesh. A monument to the horror of vanity pushed to its extreme. And worse, she could feel the others' consciousnesses inside her. The fragments of personalities trapped in each patch of skin began seeping into her mind. Voices called out in her head, faint murmurs at first, then desperate screams. "You turned us into clothing," the voices said. "Now we'll turn you." Through the night, the voices grew louder. Elise started losing her sense of self. Who was she? The seamstress? The dress? Or this new being, made of multiple consciousnesses and pieces of different bodies? When the day of the show arrived, Elise staggered through Berlin's streets toward the venue. Her movements were erratic, as if multiple people were trying to control a single body. Passers-by recoiled, horrified by the sight of the creature she'd become. The security guard at the entrance tried to stop her, but Elise, or what was left of her, pushed forward with unnatural strength. The runway lights blinded her momentarily. As she burst into the main hall, The audience fell silent. Photographers froze, cameras halfway to their faces. A deathly hush filled the room as everyone processed the horror that had just walked in. The silence shattered with a piercing scream, then another, and another. Soon, chaos erupted in the hall as people scrambled desperately for the exits. But Elise had reached her destination, the center of the runway. Under the spotlights, her dress body gleamed with a disturbing beauty. The spiraling patterns pulsed as if alive. And they were. "Look," she tried to say, but her voice emerged as a dissonant chorus of multiple throats. "Look at true beauty." The cameras that hadn't been abandoned in the panic captured the moment. Within seconds, images of the abomination on the runway spread across the internet. The Berlin dress woman, as she was instantly dubbed, went viral before the police could even cordon off the area. The first officers who tried to approach her recoiled instinctively. There was something profoundly wrong with this creature, something that tapped into primal fears older than civilization. "Stay back," one officer ordered. "Call for specialized backup." Elise turned slowly, letting everyone witness her transformation. Each movement revealed new patterns in the living fabric, new faces emerging on the dress's surface, only to sink back into its gruesome weave. That's when the first filament extended. Thin as a hair but strong as wire, it shot out from the dress toward a young model frozen in fear a few feet away. The filament touched the model's exposed arm and instantly began fusing with her skin. The young woman screamed in pain and panic as she felt something burrowing into her flesh, connecting her to the abomination. More filaments followed, seeking new victims. Each person they reached felt the same horrific sensation of being absorbed, forcibly woven into this collective organism. "This is how it begins," Elise said in her many-voiced tone. "The great tapestry. We will all become one fabric." The authorities evacuated the building and set up a perimeter. Inside, Elise continued her ghastly transformation. The dress grew, feeding on its new additions. With each person absorbed, more intricate and mesmerizing patterns emerged. Specialists were called in. Scientists speculated about an unknown pathogen. Conspiracy theorists ranted about government experiments. Religious groups saw signs of the apocalypse. Meanwhile, in the sealed-off zone, Elise moved less and less like a human. Her body had become the core of an organic structure that now filled the entire hall. The walls were coated in a skin-like material, studded with protrusions that resembled faces in agony. The floor pulsed like a massive heart. The authorities decided the threat had to be contained at all costs. Tanks surrounded the building. The order was clear. Nothing could leave. At the epicenter of this living nightmare, in the heart of the pulsating mass of flesh and fabric that was once a simple seamstress, a final spark of Elise's consciousness, gazed at her creation with a mix of horror and awe. Her dress, her masterpiece, had become far more than she'd planned. It wasn't just a garment made of human skin. It was a new kind of organism, an entity that transcended the boundaries between object and living being, between individual and collective, and it was spreading. Through the building's foundations, microscopic filaments seeped into Berlin's soil. They traveled through sewer pipes, telephone lines, and cracks in the concrete. Invisible, patient, relentless. 3 weeks after the incident, the authorities made a drastic decision. The building was bombed and burned until nothing remained but ashes. Scientists in hazmat suits collected samples, which were promptly incinerated. The site was encased in concrete and declared a permanent exclusion zone. The world moved on. The horror of the Berlin dress woman became an urban legend, then fodder for sensationalist documentaries, and eventually just a footnote in fashion history. But in the depths of Berlin's sewer system, something waited. Something that had learned to weave not just skin, but time and patience. Something that grew slowly, absorbing rats and other small creatures, building its critical mass. And occasionally, residents reported a strange sensation when wearing certain clothes, as if the fabric reacted to their touch, molding perfectly to their bodies, as if it wanted to fuse with their skin. Some swore that in certain garments bought from specific thrift stores in the city, you could make out patterns resembling human faces. Faces that seemed to watch the wearer. Elise Schneider's great tapestry continued its silent, patient work, weaving thread by thread a new reality. And on the quietest nights, if you listened closely, you could hear the distant sound of needles, working tirelessly, preparing the next pattern, the next garment, the next host, because Elise's true work would never be complete. True beauty, after all, lies in an eternal process of creation and transformation. If you enjoyed this disturbing story, don't forget to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone you want to traumatize forever. The Great Tapestry is just beginning, and there are plenty more stories waiting to be stitched into your nightmares.